Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Robert Sports Show. I'm your host, Robert. Alright, NCAA College Football Week number 11. As we run through week 11, we have, what do we have going on here? So we have 10 unbeaten teams currently. We have out of the ACC, we have Clemson, who's 9-0, out of the Big Ten. On the East Division, we have Penn State and Ohio State, who are both 8-0. Out of the West, we have Minnesota, who's 8-0. Big 12, we have Baylor, who's still undefeated. Out of the SEC, we have Georgia, who is 7-1. We have LSU and Alabama, who are both 8-0. And then over in the Pac-12, we have two 8-1 teams leading each division. As we look toward the playoffs, today's Tuesday, November 5th. Tonight is the first playoff rankings. There's got to be a different way to do the rankings than what we're doing. I don't think it's really accurate of what's going on. Because you look at currently here, Ohio State, Penn State are both 8-0. They'll play each other. One of them's got to lose. And then even if one of so let's say Ohio State wins, Penn State's got one loss. Then you got Minnesota and Ohio State undefeated for the Big Ten championship. One of them have to lose. So then you have two one-loss teams, one that lost in the in the championship game, or I mean, you can even have a scenario where you have three one-loss teams. One's the Big Ten champion. Who's in? Same way with the SEC. Georgia's currently 7-1. You have LSU and Alabama. They play each other this week, matter of fact. Say LSU wins. Alabama's got one loss. So you have LSU versus Georgia in the SEC championship game. Then you have Georgia win that. So you get Georgia, LSU, Alabama all with one loss. You have a big SEC champion. You have three Big Ten teams all with one loss and a Big Ten champion. Would a one-loss Alabama be in playoffs over a one-loss Oregon? Yeah. They either need to figure a new way of doing it, or they need to expand the playoffs. Because we get the same teams every year. Clemson, Alabama. Yes, they're the two best teams, but I don't know. There's got to be a different way, and I've came up with a couple different ideas, and I have a new idea about it, or kind of a replay of an old idea that I've done. So I'm going to do that when the season's over with, maybe first of the year, with a scenario on how to pay players. That's the hot button topic right now. Alright, so in week 10, when straight up picks 14-2, against the spread 8-8, over under 8-8. Year to date, win loss 302-77. Against the spread 180-189. Over under 188 to 181. Overall picks, that's right at 60%, 59.96. So not too bad so far. I'm happy with that. Then week 11 here, I'm going to expand back to every game. I did that for the most of the season, and I kind of get just to the top 25 there for a little bit. So for right now, for week 11, we're going back to all 49 games. So we have some great matchups. We have some matchups. The first game actually is tonight. Actually, we have Kent State Golden Flashes. They're 3-5 versus the 5-3 Toledo Rockets. Toledo's favored by 7.5 at home. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 60. Ball State Cardinals, who are 4-4 versus the 5-4 Western Michigan Broncos. Broncos are favored by 7. They're at home. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 63. Next up, we have the Miami, Ohio Redhawks, 4-4, versus the Ohio Bobcats, who are also 4-4. The Bobcats are favored by a touchdown at home. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 54.5. The University of Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns, who are 6-2, go to Coastal Carolina, who are 4-4. The Cajuns are favored by 13.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 57.5. Next up, we have the 5-3 Temple Owls versus the South Florida Bulls, who are 4-4. Temple's favored by 2.5 on the road. I like the home team here, so I'm giving the 2.5 to South Florida. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 53. Next up, we have Central Florida Knights, who are 7-2, versus the 2-7 Tulsa Golden Hurricanes. They are favored by and Knights are favored by 17 at home. I do have them winning, covering the 17, and under on the 70.5. Next up, we have the Washington Huskies, who are 5-4, versus the Oregon Beavers, who are 4-4. Huskies are favored by 10 on the road. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 65. Next up, we have the East Carolina Pirates, who are 3-6, versus the 23rd ranked SMU Mustangs, are 8-1. Mustangs favored by 23.5 on the road. Have them winning, covering, and under on the 69. The Massachusetts Minutemen, 1-8, going to Army West Point Black Knights, who are 3-6. Army's favored by 35 at home. I got Army winning, but I have UMass covering at 35, and I'm taking over on the 62. Next up, we have the 11th ranked Baylor Bears, 8-0, versus the TCU Horned Frogs, who are 4-4. Baylor is only favored by 1 point on the road. That's not much. I mean, an undefeated team only favored by 1 point on the road. Do these line makers know something that we don't know? I'm thinking they do. I'm giving TCU the 1 point. I got TCU winning, covering, and over on the 52. Baylor's first loss, TCU. Next up, we have the 3-6 Purdue Boilermakers versus the Northwestern Wildcats, who are 1-7. Purdue favored by 1.5 at home on the road. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 41.5. The Governor's Victory Bell. We have the 5th ranked Penn State Nittany Lions, 8-0, versus the 13th ranked Minnesota Golden Gophers, who are also 8-0. These are 2 of 3 Big Ten teams that are undefeated. Penn State has won 9 of 14 against Minnesota and 5 of the last 6. Both these teams are scoring 38 points during their Big Ten conference games. The Nittany Lions are giving up 9.4, while Minnesota's giving up 14.4. Penn State is favored by 6.5 on the road. This was a toughie. Toughie. I'm going with Penn State. I got Penn State winning. I got Minnesota covering the 6.5. I think it's going to come down to a field goal game. I'm taking under on the 47.5 because I think those defenses are going to come playing here. So Minnesota gets their first loss. When we have Ohio State and Penn State, I think it's in 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, whatever it is, we'll have undefeated versus undefeated. And then we'll end up in the championship game for the Big Ten with a 1-loss Minnesota, and defeated Ohio State, and a 1-loss Penn State looking on the outside in. So, Penn State wins, Minnesota covers, 6.5, under on the 47.5. Next up, we have the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who are 3-5, versus the West Virginia Mountaineers, who are 3-5. Texas Tech is favored by 1.5 on the road. I'm giving the 1.5 to West Virginia. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 60. Next up, we have the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, who are 5-4, versus the 2-7 Arkansas Razorbacks. Razorbacks are favored by 2.5 at home. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 51. Vanderbilt Commodores, 2-6, versus the 10th ranked Florida Gators, who are 7-2. Gators are favored by 25. Wow. Got them winning, covering, and under on the 47. Next up, the Florida State Seminoles, 4-5, versus the 5-4 Boston College Eagles. Eagles favored by 1.5, winning, covering, and under on the 61.5. Speaking of those Ohio State Buckeyes, They're at home. The third-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, who are 8-0. They are hosting the Maryland Terrapins, who are 3-6. Ohio State is favored by 42. I have them winning. I have Maryland covering the 42 and under on the 63. Next up, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, 2-6, versus the Virginia Cavaliers, 6-3. Cavs are favored by 16 at home, winning, covering, and over on the 45. Air Force Falcons, 7-2, taking on the New Mexico Lobos, 2-7. Air Force favored by 21.5 at home. I got them winning, covering. I got New Mexico covering the 21.5 and over on the 56.5. Next up, University of Texas San Antonio Roadrunners, 3-5 versus the 1-8 Old Dominion Monarchs. Roadrunners favored by 4.5, winning, covering, over on the 43. Stanford Cardinal, 4-4 versus the 3-6 Colorado Buffalo. Stanford Cardinal favored by 3.5 on the road, winning, covering, and under on the 54.5. Next up, we have the South Alabama Jaguars, 1-7 versus the Texas State Bobcats, 2-6. Texas State favored by 7.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 42. The Charlotte 49ers, 4-5 versus the 1-7 UTEP Miners. Charlotte favored by 11.5 on the road. I get them winning, covering, and under on the 58. Louisville Cardinals, 5-3 versus the 5-4 Miami Hurricanes. There's a hurricane coming. They are favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 51.5. Next up, we have the 23rd Kansas State Wildcats, here 6-2 versus the 5-3 Texas Longhorns. Longhorns favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 58. Next up, we have the game of the year. We have the game of the maybe decade. We have 1 versus 2. We have the number 1 ranked 8-0 LSU Tigers versus the number 2 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. Both teams 8-0. This is the first meeting in the regular season, 1 versus 2, since November 5th, 2011. Ironically enough, LSU versus Alabama. Ironically enough, LSU ranked number 1, Alabama ranked number 2. LSU won 9-6 in overtime. I actually remember that game. I remember the score. I remember oh my God, LSU and Alabama 9-6. 2 times the 1 versus 2 had met in the SEC Finals. Alabama and Florida in 08-09. The last 6 times, the last 6 times the 1 versus 2 have been either playoffs or in the BCS. All time versus LSU, Alabama leads 53-25-5. Alabama's won 8 straight. 13 times these two have played recently, and they've both been ranked. So the last 13 straight meetings of both teams were ranked when they met. Alabama's 10-3 in that time. 8 times these two have met when one team was either 1 or 2. So both these teams are really, really good. Both these teams are always there. Alabama wins a lot. Alabama's favored by 6.5 at home. The funniest stat that I seen during all looking this stuff up, this is as of yesterday, 70% of the money was on LSU. 70% of the money was on LSU. The line is on Alabama. Figure that one out, folks. Sometimes here at Over Sports Show, I like to do the sexy pick. See what everybody's going to do. Sometimes I like to go on the limb, see what happens. I want to be able to go, hey, I called that. Didn't happen very often. But you know what? I'm doing it here. If it happens, you can replay it back and go, I called that. I'm picking LSU. I'm giving the 6.5 to LSU. Alabama covers that. So it's going to be LSU winning by 6 or less. Taking under on the 64. Alabama loses to LSU wins. Alabama covers the 6.5. Under on the 64. I'm going with the money line. I'm going with the money line, LSU Tigers. So that's going to make it a very, very intriguing rest of the regular season. Because if we end up with Georgia with 1 loss, Alabama with 1 loss, LSU undefeated, SEC title game, Georgia beats LSU. We have an Georgia SEC champion with 1 loss, an Alabama and a LSU with 1 loss. So a 3 1-loss team sitting in the SEC, 3 1-loss teams sitting in the Big Ten, 1 1-loss team in the Big 12 or the Pac-12, and then a 1-loss Baylor in Big 10, Big 12. Who makes the playoffs? And an undefeated Clemson. Who's in the playoffs? Exactly. Who deserves it? Exactly. Figure that one out. That would be a hell of a freaking conversation to have. All right, next up we have the Georgia Southern Eagles 5-3 versus the 3-5 Troy Trojans. Southern Eagles are favored by 3. I'm giving them 3 to Troy. I got Troy winning, covering an under on the 56. Next up we have the the USC Trojans 5-4 versus the Arizona State Sun Devils 5-3. Sun Devils favored by 1.5. I'm giving it 1.5 to USC. I got USC winning, covering an over on the 56.5. Next up, we have the 22nd ranked Wake Forest Demon Deacons 7-1 versus the Virginia Tech Hokies, who are 5-3. Wake Forest favored by 2.5. I got them winning, covering an under on the 64.5. Next up, we have the 5-4 Illinois Fighting Illini going in against the Michigan State Spartans, who are 4-4. Michigan State is favored by 15.5. Do we all forget that Illinois beat Wisconsin? Michigan State is not Wisconsin. I'm still thinking the Spartans to win. I am having Illinois cover that 15.5 and over on the 45.5. Next up, we have the 2-7 Yukon Huskies versus the 17th ranked Cincinnati Bearcats, who are 7-1. Bearcats are favored by 35. Bearcats win. Yukon covers under on the 56. Next up, we have the UAB Blazers, University of Alabama Birmingham Blazers, 6-2, versus the Southern Miss Golden Eagles, who are 5-3. Eagles are favored by 6. I'm giving the 6 to the UAB. I get them winning, covering, and over on the 50.5. Next up, we have the North Texas Mean Green, who are 4-5, versus the 7-1 Louisiana Tech Bulldogs. Bulldogs are favored by 5.5. I get them winning, covering, and under on the 68. Next up, we have the 0-8 New Mexico State Aggies versus the 3-6 Ole Miss Rebels. The Rebels are favored by 29. I got the Rebels winning. I got New Mexico State covering at 29 and under on the 62. I think it's kind of a big matchup out of the Big Ten. We have the 18th ranked Iowa Hawkeyes, who are 6-2, versus the 16th ranked Wisconsin Badgers, who are also 6-2. Wisconsin is favored by 9.5. I got the Badgers winning. I got the Hawkeyes covering and under on the 38. Next up, we have the Georgia State Panthers, who are 6-2, versus the 3-5 University of Louisiana Monroe Warhawks. Panthers are favored by 2.5. I got them winning, covering, and taking under on the 74. Next up, we have the Florida International Panthers, who are 5-4, versus the Florida Atlantic Owls, who are 6-3. Owls are favored by 10. I got the Panthers covering, and I'm taking over on the 16.5. I got them covering in 10. Next up, we have the Appalachian State Mountaineers, who are 7-1, versus the South Carolina Gamecocks, who are 4-5. Gamecocks favored by 5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 51. Utah State Aggies 4-4 versus the 4-4 Fresno Bulldogs. Bulldogs favored by 5 at home, winning, covering, and under on the 58.5. Another set of 4-4 teams. We have the Washington State Cougars versus the California Golden Bears. Cougars are favored by 7.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 51. Next up, we have the Missouri Tigers, who are 5-3, versus the 6th ranked Georgia Bulldogs, who are 7-1. Missouri cannot win on the road. They are fucking horrible on the road, but they're great at home. They're on the road. Georgia wins, covers the 17, over on the 47. Next up, we have the 4th ranked Clemson Tigers, who are 9-0, versus the NC State Wolfpack, who's 4-4. Tigers are favored by 32.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 53.5. Next up, we have the Iowa State Cyclones, who are 5-3, versus the 9th ranked Oklahoma Sooners, Boomer Sooner, who are 7-1. Sooners favored by 2 touchdowns at home. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 67. Next up, we have Tennessee Volunteers, who are 4-5 versus the 4-4 Kentucky Wildcats. Tennessee favored by 1 on the road. I'm giving the 1 to the home team of Kentucky. I'm taking over on the 41.5. Next up, we have the 15th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who are 6-2 versus the 4-4 Duke Blue Devils. I can't talk. I have the Fighting Irish winning, covering the 8, and under on the 51.5. Next up, we have the 6-3 Liberty Flames versus the 4-4 BYU Cougars. Cougars are favored by 17.5 at home. I got them winning. I got the Flames covering the 17.5, taking under on the 58.5. Next up, we have the Wyoming Cowboys 6-2 versus the 21st ranked Boise State Broncos, who are 7-1. Boise State favored by 13. I got them winning. I got the Cowboys covering and over on the 48.5. Next up, we have the Nevada Wolfpack, who are 5-4 versus the 24th ranked San Diego State Aztecs, who are 7-1. Aztecs favored by 17. I got them winning, covering, and under on a 39.5. Last but not least, we have the San Jose Spartans, who are 4-5 versus the 5-4 Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. Warriors favored by 7 at home, win, cover, and under on the 77.5. So that's going to wrap up week number 11 on the NCAA college football season. We will see who the number 1 team is coming out of this. We'll see who the number 1 team is per the playoff committee tonight. Will LSU upset Alabama? Will Penn State beat Minnesota? 2 of the big questions going into week 11. As always, don't just have a great day, have a spiffy day. Robert Sports Show, your YouTube leader in sports channel content.